So let's talk about some of those lessons that maybe Joe passed on to Kobe that you just mentioned. One thing that stuck out to me is, like I said, if you're familiar with Kobe, you're familiar with the Mamba mentality, this idea of being cutthroat, of just being a killer, of having these natural instincts to go out and dominate, obviously on the court. And so what surprised me is how early Kobe was showing signs of having those instincts and having that demeanor. I think, you know, eh, you brought up a story when they were in Italy, and I think he was maybe playing on a team, and he said "F you" to one of the Italian coaches, and Kobe was maybe 8 or 9 at the time. So, I mean, what was Kobe like when he was young, and where did this demeanor come from?
Yeah, I think it's the nature nurture question again. I think some of it is inherently him. And I think genetically speaking, if you want to talk in those terms, I think Pam, his mother, provides a lot of that. She was the disciplinarian, the strong willed one in the family. She ran the household. She didn't put up with any crap from anyone. And so you have that aspect of his personality. And then you have him growing up in this environment where his father is playing both in the NBA and then later professionally in Europe. He's in an environment in which he's observing and learning lessons from professional athletes all the time. And he has parents who are willing to indulge him when it comes to basketball. Joe brings him to practices and to games. Kobe mops the floor during games uh, in Europe that Joe is playing. And he gets to shoot around with the team. And when one of Joe's coaches admonishes him, as you said, he, snaps back at him. And Joe and Pam just kind of say, well, that's our Kobe. So it's a little bit of everything. It's kind of the perfect melding of environment and nature and all kinds of the stew of factors that come to create this individual who just commits himself to being the best basketball player in the world and has nothing else on his mind from the time he's able to conceive of such a thought when he's 9, 10, 11 years old.
How would you describe Kobe's time in Italy and the effect that it had on his eventual career?
Yeah, he's almost an alien, right? I mean, he doesn't have the upbringing that most young basketball phenoms have. Certainly not at that time in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The Bryants are a black family from America living in Italy. They are isolated in that regard. Now they love living in Italy, and that experience teaches Kobe in some ways not to see color, or at least not to judge people based on the color of their skin. But it also, when the time comes for him and the family to move back to the Philadelphia area, it kind of isolates him to a certain degree. He hasn't had um, the upbringing and the experiences that a lot of his classmates and peers have had. When he comes back to the Lower Merion School District in the late fall of 1991, he's lived a life that virtually no one else he's encountering has lived. He can't connect with the Jewish students, or the Christian Catholic Protestant students, or the black students, or the white students. He's kind of trying to find his own way. He doesn't know what TV shows are popular. He doesn't know what music to listen to. He doesn't know how to fit in, how to dress. And what he's got is basketball, and he uses basketball as his in to kind of gain acceptance and become someone who eventually, by the time he graduates, is the most popular and well-known figure, not only at Lower Merion High School, but in some ways the entire Philadelphia community.
Yeah, you reminded me, one thing that stuck out that you just mentioned was how Kobe viewed basketball as an escape. And I think maybe there was a part in the book where you say, Kobe thought, thank God I have basketball. It's my escape from this reality that, like you were mentioning, I don't really know how to fit in, right? I don't know how to communicate with these students. I don't know what American culture is, but I know how to dribble and shoot a basketball. So basketball really seemed like an escape for him in those early days when he moved back.
Yeah, it was everything to him. And it allowed him to kind of gain the traction he needed socially, uh, almost like a vocation. Like this is my identity. I'm a basketball player. At least that's how people were going to see him initially. And then by seeing him that way, it allowed him to kind of gain some traction in terms of getting to know people. But the flip side of that too, Nick, is that to a certain degree, he tried on personalities like he was trying on clothes. I mean, he was trying to figure out who he was. That's why he joined the Black Student Union organization. That's why he delved into rapping and music. He was really trying to get a sense of who he was apart from just being this great basketball player.
Speaking of trying on different personalities, there's a part in the book where you talk about Kobe falling in love with storytelling. And that stuck out to me because I watched one of his last interviews that he did, and I believe it was with Lewis Howes. And at the time, Kobe was, writing children's books and getting more into storytelling and movie producing. And he talks about how much he loves storytelling and how powerful storytelling is. What I didn't know was that this was a passion of his ever since he was in high school.
Yeah, his closest mentor at Lower Merion was his 10th and 12th grade English teacher, Jeannie Mastriano. They really connected. He referred to her as his muse years after they met. They stayed in contact over the years, and she really tapped into the intellectual side of his personality, his imagination. He really viewed himself. He read um, the Joseph Campbell book. Now I'm drawing a blank on the title of it, which it's a famous book, "The Hero of a Thousand Faces." Excuse me, and uh, the idea of a hero's journey. And Kobe really viewed himself as being on a hero's journey, as if he was Odysseus or Luke Skywalker, something like that. So he and Genie really connected on that level, and it was something that I think when you talk about Kobe and his death, I think it's something that for people who admired him and were aware of him even, it's what made his death so tragic in their eyes, is that there was this feeling that after basketball he had done things apart from the sport, storytelling, filmmaking, and there was more for him to do. And by dying at such a young age, he will never obviously get to fulfill those aspirations. And people feel like, God, what else could he have done, would he have done with the remaining years of his life?
Right. Let's get into Kobe's Lower Merion high school career. So, if you don't mind kind of setting the stage for how Kobe was, how Kobe found his way to Lower Merion High School, how he was recruited, the story of Greg Downer, how that all kind of came together.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of quaint by today's standards. Lower Merion was the local public high school that the Bryants, like any resident of Lower Merion Township, at least the side of Lower Merion Township, that fed into that high school. There's another high school within the school district. Um, would have sent their kids to. You know, Kobe was recruited to go to private schools and Catholic schools, and but Joe and Pam Bryant wanted him to go to the local public school. Greg Downer had just taken over as the boys basketball coach there a few years earlier and had started turning the program around. Really, Lower Merion for many years had not had much of a boys basketball program to speak of. You know, kind of place where the uniforms were kind of ragged and they had so few guys on the team that if too many fouled out, they'd have to finish a game with four guys on the floor. Um, and then Kobe comes along. Well, first Downer comes along and starts to turn things around, and then he gets Kobe, and he realizes, oh my gosh, I've got a crown jewel here. I've got the kind of kid who comes along once in a lifetime if you're lucky. But Kobe, as a freshman, as a ninth grader, is so selfish and such a ball hog that the team only wins 3 or 4 games the entire season. And his teammates resent him because they say, who's this young kid, 14 years old, shooting the ball all the time? I don't care how good he is. We can't play this way. And over the next couple of years, there's an evolution in Kobe where Downer and other coaches and other players have to kind of work on him to say, hey, look, you know, if we're going to be as good a team as we can possibly be, you've got to adjust a little bit, and the people around you have to adjust to you. And by the time he leaves, Lower Merion has won a district championship his senior year. They've won the state championship his senior year. And really, the Lower Merion Aces, even more than the 76ers, are kind of the Philadelphia basketball team. They're kind of this traveling roadshow all because of Kobe.
There's a quote. I think his ninth grade classmate told Kobe that he's not that good, and Kobe replied, "That's because the coach wouldn't let me shoot."
Yeah, I mean that's exactly how he felt. Was that, and you can understand it to a certain degree because, as we said, he's so isolated in his upbringing. He's learned the sport and honed his skills in the sport, kind of almost in like a phone booth, like a chamber almost. He hasn't been playing a lot of team basketball, and so it's an adjustment for him, and it's rough at times. But as I said, by the end of his high school career, he's clearly the best player in the state and the best high school player in the country.
I keep coming back to this because I just can't wrap my head around it. And maybe it's just me, but the level of maturity that Kobe showed early on. I mean, there's so many examples throughout the book of teammates saying, and I quote, this kid was actually getting his body ready to play in the NBA, eating right at a young age. He wouldn't go out and do some of the things that, his teammates would do or that maybe quote unquote normal high school kids would do. Um, can you just give the audience an appreciation for how mature Kobe was and how um, I guess how seriously he viewed his, end goal of making the NBA, like how real that was for him at such a young age.
Yeah, he just kind of presumed to a certain degree, hey, I'm going to be the best basketball player on the planet, and I will do whatever I have to do to achieve that goal. So when he's playing pickup at age 13 and 14 with grown men and college players, he's putting on knee pads and elbow pads because he's seen professionals do it. He's seen his father do it. He's icing his knees after pickup games. And people are looking at him and saying, what is this kid doing? But that's the way he goes about things. One anecdote that I love is that when he was 15 or 16, he had a friend who was a couple of years older than him. And the two of them would drive around to playgrounds and parks in and around Philadelphia. And they would play basketball, but it was kind of a unique brand of basketball they'd play. Kobe was really working on things, drilling himself, working on dunks and jump shots. And the friend had two jobs. One, he would rebound for Kobe, and two, he would scream at Kobe. Kobe wanted to train himself to be able to play against the very best players in the very toughest environments in Philadelphia and around the country. And that meant playing against guys who grew up in the city who were thought to be tougher than he was. So this friend would scream at him, you're soft. You go to a white school. You couldn't play in the public league, screaming these things at him while Kobe is working on his game. And the idea of like a 15, 16-year-old willingly putting himself through that just kind of blew my mind. So those are the things the kind of things that Kobe did to prepare himself so that, fast forward into his NBA career, there's this famous clip of Matt Barnes, he's going to inbound the ball and Kobe's standing in front of him at the inbounds line, at the baseline, and Barnes fakes like he's going to throw the ball in Kobe's face and Kobe doesn't flinch. There's a reason that Kobe could get himself to that point, that he wouldn't flinch when someone threatens to throw a basketball in his face. And it's all the prep and preparation that he did back when he was a kid.
I feel like one of the themes from this podcast episode is going to end up being, the whole nature versus nurture. And when it comes to Kobe, there's this level of self-confidence, and we've touched, on it a little bit throughout this episode, but there's this level of self-confidence that not only he had, but others around him were just amazed by. I think there's a story of Tim Legler watching him play against D1 athletes and professional basketball players, and Tim saying, I have never seen someone be so confident at anything before, like Kobe was, with basketball. So this level of self-confidence, listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that, I can emulate Kobe's level of self-confidence, but I guess for the people listening, like what are some things from studying Kobe that he either did or, that maybe his circumstances provided him with that enabled him to be so self-confident?
Um, I think a lot of that is just who he was. There's a mystery to individuality, and uh, I think the environment augmented it. I think he came from a nuclear family. He was, as we talked about, living abroad for a long time, where he could devote himself almost kind of in a monkish kind of way to honing his basketball skills. I think he was willing when he came back to the United States to make sacrifices that other teenage basketball players weren't willing to make. He was willing to stay home and watch film and video of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Michael Jordan. He had a quasi girlfriend through his first 3 years of high school, And to him, a date with her was her coming over to the Bryant's house and watching basketball videos with him. Um, and his parents weren't going to tell him, hey, turn this off, go outside and have some fun. He wanted to play basketball. He told Jeannie Mastriano, his English teacher, that he often dribbled himself to sleep. So some of this is just who Kobe Bryant was, and some of it was, okay, this is who he is, and we, as the people around him, his family, his friends, his teachers, his coaches, are going to allow him to be this way. So where that confidence comes from, he's just succeeding at every level, and um, being able to play in the way that he wants to play. And with each subsequent success, he advances to the next stage of his life and his career.
So Kobe wasn't the most romantic man, maybe
No,
early in his high school in
no,
his high school
not by any
days.
stretch.
But that brings up this dichotomy of who Kobe Bryant was on the court versus who he was off the court. And, his romantic life might be one inclination of that. But I think you described Kobe as, within basketball, he was cutthroat, cunning, bulletproof, away from basketball, courteous, naive, and sheltered. So pretty stark difference between Kobe on the court and Kobe off the court.
Yeah, like I said earlier, he was looking for himself, trying to figure out who he was. He tried on different personalities. He could be comfortable amongst the honor students in his English class. He could be comfortable with the jocks. He could be comfortable with the kids who sang in the choir. But what one of the things I came away from in learning about his life was that he didn't retain many, if any, very close friends from his high school years. And that's telling, I think. He didn't have a core group of 3 or 4 people who stayed tight with him the rest of his life. Greg Downer was an exception to that rule. They stayed in close contact for years and years, but even Downer didn't know right up until the moment that Kobe announced that he was going to take his talents to the NBA. Kobe never told Downer what his decision was, whether he was going to go to college or go to the NBA. Downer had his suspicions, but Kobe never told him explicitly, "Hey, I'm gonna skip college and enter the draft right away." So one of his friends told me that he was operating at a higher level or 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody else, and I think that's true. But I think there are costs to that as well. And I think there are some things that play out in Kobe's later life. Um, the incident and the accusations and the sexual assault charges in Aurora, Colorado, most notably, that you can trace back to his life early on, where he just skipped some steps in the development of a quote unquote normal human being. And it led to some repercussions for him down the road.
I definitely want to get into Kobe's decision of bypassing college and going straight to the NBA because I think there's a lot to unpack there. But even before we get to that, there were a lot of stories of Kobe. We've described him as cutthroat and cunning and bulletproof on the court, and certainly there were examples of that during practice with his teammates. And two that stuck out to me was first the one of him shoving his teammate into, I guess, a wall, and the teammate having to get stitches on his elbow. And then the second example was a teammate running away from Kobe because he was scared of what Kobe was going to do to him after missing a game-winning layup. So can you maybe talk a little bit to those two, I guess, stories?
Yeah, I mean, look, this was Kobe as intimidator. This was Kobe as I'm the best player on the team. If you don't keep up with me, uh, I don't want to know you. I don't want you near me. And this kill or be killed mentality when it came to any drill that he was going through during a practice at Lower Merion High School. So yeah, the second best player on the team, Dan Pangrazio and Kobe are involved in a rebounding drill together, and to win the drill, to get the rebound, Kobe shoves Dan into a wall. And there's a studded there are nails and studs in the wall, and Dan's arm hits the studs in the wall, and he has to go to the hospital to get stitches. But Kobe wins the drill and is happy and raises the ball above his head to say, "I won." And there's another 3-on-3 drill during Kobe's senior year, when the last guy on the bench, little Robbie Schwartz, is on Kobe's team and takes a layup to try to win the game and misses it. And Kobe's team loses the drill. And Kobe is not happy and kind of sort of chases Robbie around the school. It's kind of an apocryphal story. He didn't chase him totally around the school, but he was not happy. And those sorts of anecdotes are the kinds of things that people who knew Kobe back then talk about often, about what he was willing to do to win and what he demanded of others around him in the name of winning.
So Kobe's high school career culminates in him winning the state championship, both the district and the state championship. It involved Lower Merion beating their longtime rival Chester, who Kobe especially despised. They were often, portrayed as kind of tougher, let's say inner city kids. And Kobe's career, his high school career. So his junior year, he's averaging 31.8 points a game. By his senior year, he's a high school. I mean, he's a national, he's nationally recognized. People typically know who Kobe Bryant is. But it ends with him winning like I said, the state championship. So can you kind of paint the picture of what that championship meant to Kobe and kind of everything that went into that and everything that was involved with Lower Merion finally winning that, elusive state championship?
Yeah, they hadn't won a state championship in 53 years, and Kobe judged himself based on the standard that he wanted to be the best player on the best team in the state of Pennsylvania. And so that championship meant everything to him. And you mentioned Chester, and Chester was the program in Pennsylvania at the time. Chester is a small city south of Philadelphia, has lots of societal problems, poverty, crime. The kids who come out of Chester are tough. They are tenacious. That basketball program is the point of pride in the city. And Lower Merion had to beat them twice that year. They had to beat them in the district championship game, which they did, and they had to beat them in the state semifinals, which they did in overtime. And that rivalry meant the world to Kobe, the fact that he could say, we beat Chester twice. And the irony is that in the state championship game against Erie Cathedral Prep, Kobe didn't have a very good game. He only had 17 points, struggled early on. The game was a bit of a slog, but they won, and he hit 2 late free throws to ice the game, and 3 late free throws, I should say. And he finds his father at the end of the game and gives him a big long hug. And it just means everything to him. He's a champion. And again, that kind of carries over to his career with the Lakers. He always, he talked about the 5 rings, that it was about winning championships. And I think that state championship in some ways is kind of the perfect exemplar of who Kobe was as a player and a person. He's the best player, the highest scorer on the best team in the state of Pennsylvania.
And then in typical Kobe fashion, I think maybe the next night or a couple nights after, there's a party. There's a cheerleaders party. He stays for an
that
hour.
night. Yeah, that night he goes back to the post party back in Lower Merion. They've driven home from central Pennsylvania where the game was. Everybody's hanging out, having a great time. He shows up at the party, stays an hour, and he drives home.